Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us here at the CannAtlantic Conference. This session is sponsored by Holistic Industries and Soulful Cannabis. Holistic Industries is a multi-state cannabis operator that can be found in various cannabis markets, including 4 locations in Pennsylvania. Speaking for them today is their Director of Outreach, Rabbi Kahn. Soulful Cannabis is a nonprofit that aims to inject a notion of corporate social responsibility within the cannabis industry, helps ensure patients have easy access to the plant medicine, and also fights for diversity and equity within all of the emerging cannabis markets. I'm joined today with one of their co-founders, Jason Mitchell. Gentlemen, thank you both for joining this important conversation. I really appreciate you being here and supporting the CannAtlantic Conference.
Thank you.
Great to be here.
We are going to get into our first question around this important topic, which is dealing with diversity in hiring and implementing good hiring practices that ensure that equity and diversity are at the forefront of this conversation. James, Rabbi Kahn, we will go with you first. How does Holistic Industries ensure that they are hiring diverse candidates? What actions are you taking to make that a possibility?
Well, just let me first just say thanks for having me here. It's just a pleasure to get to talk to Jason, to get to talk to you, Tawhid, and to be just part of this conference. The legal cannabis industry is booming and it will continue to boom. And that represents a profound opportunity for economic inclusion and empowerment, but only if we make it so. So that's, I'm here to learn and to talk, and I'm just excited to be here. So, as far as what we're doing to increase diversity in the industry, there's a lot of things we're doing. One of the main things we're doing is trying to create an inclusive culture, because I don't think it's enough to just to simply boost our numbers, but we're trying to create a culture that values inclusivity. We're also, whenever we enter a new market, we research local job advertising platforms. We research the diversity of the market itself. It's important to us that our stores and our facilities reflect the communities that we're in. So that's key. We've teamed up with a few online platforms for job exchanges and trying that really specialize in getting the word out, because that's really one of the main problems that I've seen is, we can value diversity, but our HR team only sees the applicants who apply, who find out about the job. So if we're not posting it in the right places, if it's not getting to the right people, then we just won't see a diverse group of applicants. So getting the word out is key. And I can tell you a bit more, on a bigger picture of what we do, but maybe I should let Jason chime in for a minute, and I'll hold back.
No, that's great. Again, from the nonprofit standpoint, we try to approach corporations like yours and others and institute that conversation initially about how we can connect your HR department to specific sectors of communities that may not be informed. There's not a lot of commercial outlet that allows the marginalized communities to know that Holistic is hiring, or there's really a disconnect in how we can get the job offering in the corporate cannabis world into those neighborhoods to advertise, right? So we do the boots on the ground kind of work to connect with the resources in those neighborhoods to kind of continue that pipeline from those marginalized communities and communities of color directly to corporations like Holistic.
And it's critical because, the cannabis industry experience, building experience today is going to determine what the industry looks like 10 years from now, right?
Correct. Yes.
So, if we don't create an inclusive group at this point in this early stage of the cannabis industry's formation, then it ain't going to look inclusive 10 years from now. And
correct.
That's kind of the fuel that's the pressure and opportunity that I feel and sense. And Tawhid, maybe we can we'll definitely get the folks who are listening to this recording into the conference itself. We'll find some way to get a link to our job site. It's open up across the country with Holistic and with a lot of other folks.
Yeah, I'd like to back that up. I think one of the mantras we have at Soulful is the idea that the cannabis industry is so new and fresh state to state that there's not a lot of grooves in its way of function. So let's go ahead and rather than have to deal with, and you see what sociologically, what dealing with some of the grooves in our systems are like today, and undoing that. Let's create the proper grooving now.
Yeah. And we know that, in every emerging market, as there's a transition from legacy and the original to a more regulated one, that there's a boom in jobs. We know that cannabis, the industry is a job creator. We know that there's always a high demand, whether you're a grower processor or dispensary. Because of this high demand, what makes a person stand out as a good candidate? And on top of that, what are the ongoing barriers we continuously see in different markets? And, what are the approaches that we can, think about, or people can also kind of advocate or talk about in their own states when it comes to addressing these barriers of job applications and actually just being considered for a job? Can both of you speak to that?
Yeah. I mean, I'll tell you, the first barrier that comes to mind is in many states is if you have a criminal background, if you have any sort of history of being arrested for cannabis related charges, you're often prevented from getting licensed and being able to work in the industry. So it's kind of, when we're talking about diversity, it's so painful because the same systemic racism that we've seen in who the police target, in over-policed communities. These folks who suffered under that unjust system, now finally we get this legal cannabis industry, and those same folks now are prevented from participating because of a charge, that probably they wouldn't have received if they were, if they would have been born white. I knew a lot of kids in college who got arrested for smoking a joint, and very few of them ended up with anything on their record. But that can now keep you from being able to work in the cannabis industry. And we one of the things we've started to do is when we enter new markets is to partner with legal aid societies. So in Illinois, in particular, we've partnered with Cabrini Green Legal Aid Society, and we're working with them we're really sponsoring them so that they can provide pro bono legal services to potential job applicants who could then, have their any criminal background expunged and sealed, and then they would be able to access and apply for jobs in the Illinois program.
So in Pennsylvania, Rabbi, there are some expungement processes coming online as well, and I know there are expungement conversations that occur across the country, specifically supported by a couple of great people. But we've been trying to look at least trying to, if we're going to create that barrier of entry where if you have a conviction that's cannabis related in the cannabis industry, let's at least acknowledge the fact that these are the people who were doing the work prior to the work being legitimized, right? So let's put a time limit on that. So let's say if you were doing it in the last, if it's something you did when you were a child, or something you did as a young adult compared to now. So if there's, whatever the window is, let's narrow the window of opportunity. So if it happened less than 2 years ago, it's an issue. But if it happened further than 2 years ago,
automatically expunged. I mean, if it's no longer a crime in the state you're living in, that's my take.
I couldn't agree more. And again, we're talking about that, the government has decided both statewide, and it sounds like we're moving towards a federal acceptance of cannabis being an essential part of people's daily lives in function. So we have to figure out a way to undo that systemic racist problems created by the judicial system and allow these people to get back in. And again, there's very narrow windows. We were talking earlier about trying to figure out, I've had some friends in the industry who would hire people in their business, but not require them to be badged in the cannabis side And as long as they stayed away from plant touching, like you stayed accounting or you stayed, outside of the realm of coming in contact with the plant, we could then look at how to employ people with those restrictions.
I think that's key. I think people who are interested in working in the cannabis industry should be thinking big. Ancillary businesses that don't touch the plant, like even delivery or
packaging, delivery. Yes, no.
Those are
marketing.
Yeah, and you can have them on a national level. There's a lot less risk involved. So for people who do have some of these, who have a criminal history that prevents them from getting badged in their state, there are other opportunities outside of expungement. And for people that are just looking to get a job and working in the cannabis industry, my tips, as Jason said, there's not a lot of, there's people with experience, but it's sometimes very difficult to get across your experience if it wasn't in a license regulated, system. So, if you've been growing in your closet for a decade and have mastered that, sometimes it's hard to get across that experience when you're talking to an HR department.
Sure.
So,
we've learned, we've actually taken some time and learned to sat with people to how to write that in your resume as horticultural experience, and being able to say that you've got expressive cannabinoid experience, and you've done some gray area, without terribly incriminating yourself, being able to articulate your experience in a gray market to transform into participation in this market.
Yeah, I think it's tricky, but I think it's important. I'm glad you guys.
And it takes these conversations. It really does.
Yeah.
When both of you are in the line of work that you do and the experiences that you both bring to the table in the cannabis industry, when you're developing best practices, when you're thinking about how can we set the standard, how can we set the bar, and also how can we move the needle and get better at creating a more inclusive, a more thriving, a stronger pipeline that is a workforce pipeline for people to participate or to build leadership to, as you mentioned, Rabbi, creating ancillary businesses and feeling empowered to do so, to participate that way. When you're looking for kind of guides or best practices elsewhere, like where are you looking to kind of measure yourself? Who are you looking at to see, how can we get better at our hiring, or how can we get better at our employment, or how can we make a better industry? Are there any other industries or any other organizations or any other things that you kind of look at and say, how can we implement this and make ourselves better in this space?
We're not unique in our challenges with diversity. If you're looking at the top Fortune 500 companies, they're wealthy white guys at the top typically. So it's hard to point to an industry that somehow got this right from the get-go. But I don't know, Jason. I mean, part of what I take inspiration from, and where I'm looking for where I take some vision from, is from conferences like this, and from relationships I have with guys like Jason and Soulful Cannabis, and really, not just this inclusive culture that we're trying. Looking around, who am I surrounded by? When we're having marketing conversations, who's part of those conversations? So really just expanding that, not thinking within the cannabis bubble. But I don't know if there's one specific, company that I can think of, at least not off the top of my head, that's coming to me. But really this conversation and this conference.
Well, and I'd say in the vein of best practices, right? We can look at, as the cannabis industry builds itself across the country, state by state, we talk about these social equity preclusions and inclusions in the industry. We can start to see a state like California implement their version of social equity legislation, or we can start to see Massachusetts. So as time goes on, now we start to see a decent model of where the gaps are, even though we are being conscientious of including license holders for marginalized communities, people of color, and people of certain economic value, under a certain economic value. The idea is none of the states have provided any infrastructure for those people. If you generally are under $60,000 a year and you qualify for these social equity licenses, there's no support that the people in the corporate world have had for generations, whether it's access to capital, understanding the articulation of certain business acumen and how you function, any background in licensing or permitting or applying to your local legislative process as well. So I think we're gaining an idea of what best practices will look like with every failure state to state. Yep. And then you hear examples in places like Illinois where aldermen want 100% of the profitability to go to their communities. And so we're engaging in these really outside the baseline of capitalistic conversations that start to be restorative in their process as well. But again, I think it's such a new industry that we're really looking at where the failures are, say in a Massachusetts or California, to make the next version or the next, I'm currently talking to some of the legislators in PA about how to amend Act 16 and what makes it better.
Explain what Act 16 is.
So Act 16 is what made medical marijuana, medical cannabis access legal in PA. So we're looking to roll it out. It rolled out in a way that it was accessible for some, but not all. And it's created an industrial environment that's successful for some, but not all. Mm-hmm. And we're looking to see how we can tweak that in ways in the next round of legislation, just to give some improvement, right? So that's the way you can look at what failed or what is failing in the first round legislatively, and advocate and move towards positive change in the next round.
Yeah, I love looking at social equity from the perspective of jobs, because if you're just looking at social equity from the perspective of licenses, you're going to have a handful of winners at the end. Whether it's a diverse group or not, you're talking about a small number of people who own licenses, and I'm all for it being a diverse group, but the potential for jobs to help restore, repair some of the damage of the war on drugs, for jobs that have good benefits and good pay. And cannabis brings that opportunity and that potential, and really, has the potential to kind of remake communities. There's a lot of money coming into this, so I really like expanding kind of. Often when we talk about social equity, it's really looked at as who's holding these licenses, and we should continue that conversation. But it's jobs too. I mean, and I'll tell you another best practice that Holistic is, I think, really, I really have seen work well, which is our commitment to promoting from within.
Right.
Really noticing where talent lies in the company, and then having a culture that celebrates it, and then also a culture of mentorship and cross training, and recognizing, someone might be, I started off running our dispensary in Maryland, and my some of my skills were better suited for community outreach, and thankfully I was in a company that was flexible enough and could recognize that talent and put me in the right place. And we try to do that across the board. But I think, company, the more that can happen, the better.
In terms of, this is a good segue too, workforce development trainings. Mm-hmm. Like you are able to hire people within, you're promoting people within. Can you talk about how do you build leadership within the industry? How do you find the people who do get those jobs within a dispensary or grow processor, and you feel like you can empower them and train them to get better and rise within the ranks? What are some ways that you can kind of build that workforce that becomes professionalized, a lot more skillful in terms of working with this industry? Can you talk a little bit more about that?
I mean, it's been pretty informal and not, as far as the way I've seen it work. But it's been, primarily speaking to managers and making sure that there's an open line of communication about, I just remember our VP of retail constantly checking in with me, who are the rising stars here? I mean, so few people enter, when I was running the dispensary, enter thinking like, this is all I want to do is just work, as a bud tender. They really want to work in the industry. They're not sure what that looks like. And it serves the company really to help them figure out where, when you find someone who's talented and who's passionate and who cares, to find the right spot for them. But I don't know if I've seen it systematized in a way that we're starting to create internship programs and working with universities to create those, to kind of create structures for people to have an internship and to get mentorship. But it's challenging on the regulatory side. But we are doing some cool stuff on that end too. Just to jump off for a second, in Massachusetts, we're working with a school called American International College. And there it's a majority minority population of students, many of whom are really interested in the cannabis industry. And so we've partnered with the school and helped them create a master's program in cannabis science. And there's 16 people that just started a week ago in this program. I think all of them from diverse backgrounds, and we're really partnering with the university professors to create programs, to create classes that are going to serve getting a real job in the industry. And I'd love to see more of that. Really, we're actually building our own systems and our own best practices. We're building our own pipelines to applicants, whether through legal aid societies or through university connections.
And that's specifically new, I think, more so to the East Coast. Massachusetts, I know Pennsylvania's got Pennsylvania Institute of Technology and a couple other collaborative environments that they're trying the same thing. That's really a new model, and it's really the smartest model to be able to tap right into new university programs that are educating people in the marketing of cannabis rather than having to learn it on the fly and then start as a bud tender and work through. Not everybody gets the example I get, where I started as a patient and in 2009 was offered a job in a legitimate dispensary and kind of spent my life career over the next 10, 11 years working every aspect of that industry I could. So in that, I think because we're such an infantile industry in the sense of age, that we're really not a national industry yet. And until that happens, it's going to be a slow and arduous process.
Yeah. Well, it's also frustrating because these same barriers to entry are present everywhere. So even as I'm talking to you about, the school pipeline, you have the challenge of there's no, it costs a lot of money. I looked at the University of Maryland has a great program out of the School of Pharmacy, and it's $20,000 a year, and not everybody and there's really no federal dollars or scholarship money.
There is none.
So it's actually something I'm currently working on. I don't have anything to announce at this moment, but I can tell you that Holistic is really working on a scholarship program to help specifically for folks, for people of color, to be able to enter these programs who may otherwise financially not be able to.
That's awesome.
It's cool.
That's awesome. I'm glad to hear that. Yeah, again, I think that's why you see these smaller universities trying to reinvigorate their, academic schedules to draw more attention, as well as I think, Pennsylvania has done a great job of leading by example with the clinical registrant. We don't know how it's going to play out yet, but tying the industry and cannabis research specifically to universities and allowing some sort of development of that together, I think is huge for moving forward.
You think that will help in this realm, in the realm of increasing diversity in the industry?
I do. I mean, one of the things I noticed in these smaller universities are their entry level cost is much lower. So you talk about what it costs to be a terp. I can tell you at PIT, it's a much more reasonable tuition, right? Yeah. So then when I walk around that university campus, I see more people who look like me, more people who come from an under $70,000 a year annual income and can still afford to go to a university.
Yep.
So I think we're slowly making that incremental change. First, we got to get Black and brown people to be able to go to school and then be able to study stuff that they want to study, and then have access to those talented people on the corporate end on the other side. And I think we're getting there slowly by these kinds of conversations, by us being able to directly say, okay, well, when we get off this conversation, we're going to talk more about that scholarship program because that's huge.
Yeah.
I want to talk more about,
we are reaching the final 5-minute mark of our awesome conversation. And again, thank you for those who have been tuning in and listening to some really great leaders within the space on the industry side and in the movement advocacy space as well. I would be remiss if we did not talk about COVID-19 and then in the pandemic that we live in right now. How has that influenced hiring? Has that impacted the jobs, the demand in jobs, or any sort of like pivoting within the industry to change how it's handling this pandemic? Have you noticed anything because of what we're dealing with?
Look at us here. I mean, we're supposed to be celebrating together months ago, and it was, what our initial vision of working with Jason and Soulful Cannabis and CannAtlantic was to do a job fair. That was my main. I wanted to just get jobs in front of people. So I think that's proving challenging because the best way to get a job is to network and to just be around, to look around you and to see people who are in the industry and build relationships with them. And, if you could find someone and they get a sense of who you are and what you could bring to the table, that's how you can get a job. But so that's, been a real challenge. I think that COVID has just stopped one-on-one, easy networking from happening. Jason, what do you think?
Yeah, look, I think it certainly has affected us. I think it's forcing us to think outside the box now. Here we are in all parts of the world being able to have these conversations if we're in the same room at the same time. I'm trying to figure out how we can now move forward and connect though. But again, what I don't want this to become is another barrier because of technology, right? Like if we don't have access to the marginalized communities because they don't have internet or they don't have, so it's another barrier that slows down getting people to the pipeline. But I'm willing to take these challenges on because I've met inspirational people like yourself, Tahid, and that we are making a difference. That when I hear Holistic go out of the way to create scholarship, when I know what the future looks like next year or the year beyond, because we are participating in these kinds of environments, I'll continue to push through. So I'm pretty stoked on where we're at. But certainly COVID is certainly, I wanted to be in the same room with the three of you and a lot more. So it certainly has affected me in a negative way.
But I tell you, I do feel inspired, and I feel grateful to. I think this matters to the industry. I think I think we've made it matter. I know all the three of us see cannabis as a force for good, but it doesn't just happen on its own. So that's our job is to make sure that's how it looks 10 years from now, that it did create good, that we did do good. So challenges, there's a lot of them, but inspiration, there's a lot of that too.
We are nearing our ending here, and I really appreciate both of your time. I'm going to give you a quick 30 seconds between the both of you. If there's one actionable item that you want viewers to take after listening to your session, give someone something to do. What would you suggest people do? I'll start with you, Rabbi Kahn.
I mean, go to our website. Go check out holisticindustries.com and click on careers or jobs or whatever, however you have it stated, and look at the jobs that we have up there. there's jobs. There are jobs. You may be hurting because you may have lost yours, but there are a lot more coming up, and the industry is just growing and growing and growing. And just believe in yourself and figure out what you do well, and come and prepare to tell us about it.
Please ask. That's all. That's in that vein, I would say ask the industry if they have a place for you. Ask your legislators what they could be doing next for you and how to lower the barrier of entry so you can participate. But ask. Your voice is huge. I think we have learned during this time to be able to participate individually. We're no different, square to square, in this environment. So please ask the question.
Again, thank you both for supporting the CannAtlantic Conference. Thank you for being a part of this amazing.
Thank you. Thank you for the leadership that you show as well, Tahid, for real.
Listen, it takes a village to pull this all together. So without your support, this wouldn't exist. So both of you, so what we're gonna do is, now that we are finishing this recording, we're gonna go into a live Q&A, and we will have people who have questions. If you've been placing questions within the chat, we will be answering that live. And if not, we will have our panelists be able to expand on any sort of topics, or if things change within 2 weeks, if there's new information we want to talk about, we will certainly have time to talk about that as well. So thank you both for being a part of this recording, and take care.
Great.
Thank you.
Thanks, guy.